I want to welcome everyone to Ontario County and to Wood Library. I'd like to thank Wood Library for allowing us to use this incredible space. And again, I want to thank everyone for being here. I know how busy everyone is, and for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. I just want to thank you. I also want to introduce a couple of people. Actually, maybe I'll start with introducing myself. For those of you who don't know, my name is Pam Helming. I represent the 54th Senate District, which includes all of Wayne County, all of Seneca County, parts of Ontario County, Cayuga County, a piece of Monroe County, and also Tompkins County. So rural resources, agriculture, farming is incredibly important in the 54th District, as is protecting all of our natural resources, including our lakes. And we all know how farming and lake protection tie together. So I'm so pleased to have you here today. I'm also pleased to have a panel of experts who I will introduce in just a moment. But before I do, I just wanted to give you some idea of who we have in the audience. We have a great diverse group which is going to help us during our interactive discussions later on. So today we have farmers and agribusiness represented, including Cornell Cooperative Extension representatives from 4 counties, 14 municipal officials, 6 county officials, 2 land trusts, and many, many other organizations. I think it's safe to say that all of us here today, we value agriculture. We understand the importance of it in our community. It's the leading industry here in the Finger Lakes region. It drives a portion of our economy, creates job opportunities, and we all know that our farmers feed our families. Our farmers are great stewards of the land, and they do great work in partnership with many other organizations to protect our watersheds and our beautiful lakes. And again, I just want to thank everyone for being here today. We're going to have some incredible discussions later on. We're going to focus on how to strengthen the economic viability of farms and protect farmland in our region. And at this time, what I'd like to do is introduce a few people from my team. For those of you who don't know, I have a district office that's located in Geneva, New York. We're there 5 days a week, happy to answer any questions you have at any time. You could stop by, email us, or give us a call. If you're from Wayne County, we also have an office located in the county courthouse in Lyons. But we're happy to meet with you whenever it works for you. I know for many of you, if you're in the farm business, that could be anytime, depending upon the weather and the season. But here with me today, I have Chris Catt, who's my chief of staff, Jonathan Monfiletto, who is director of communications, and some of you may know I also have the privilege of serving as the co-chair of the Legislative Commission on Rural Resources. And the director of the commission and also legal counsel for the commission is Jillian Cassallen. Jill's here with us today. And I want to thank Jill because she did a great job in helping to coordinate this event. And Jill is at the forefront with me when we're in Albany battling on behalf of farmers and having money in the budget for farm programs like the grant protection programs, as well as a number of research programs which are so incredibly important. We're blessed to have great organizations like Cornell, the Cooperative Extensions, as well as the Research Foundation. In Geneva, we have the New York Wine and Culinary Center, which promotes New York State grown products just down the street from here. So it's incredibly important, as I said earlier, for us in this district to continue to support farmers and agribusiness owners and those who support those folks, which is why we're here today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. First up, we have David Haight, the New York State Director of American Farmland Trust, and Samantha Levy, American Farmland Trust New York Policy Manager. David has a long history of leadership with American Farmland Trust and has helped coordinate projects that have permanently protected more than 4,000 acres of New York State farmland. He also operates a greenhouse just outside of Saratoga Springs. David was my guest speaker at the annual meeting of the Legislative Commission on Rural Resources, and he spends a good amount of time in Albany educating our state representatives about farmland protection. Samantha is relatively new to American Farmland Trust, and one of her first days was spent attending the annual meeting of the Legislative Commission on Rural Resources, and I thank you for that. She has a master's degree in food studies from NYU, and I'm so impressed by her leadership in organizing today's event. Thank you for bringing everyone together for this important discussion. Thank you. Also joining us today to present are two representatives from New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. John Brennan, a farmland protection specialist and grant manager, and Jeff Kehoe, an agriculture protection specialist. Mr. Brennan has been with the Department of Ag and Markets for over 10 years. He works within the Division of Ag Protection and Development in Albany. John developed the Municipal and County Agricultural and Farmland Protection Planning Grant Program and continues to work closely with grant programs. He also coordinates the New York State Agricultural District Program, and he has decades of experience in planning in open space and farmland protection in both New Jersey and the Adirondacks. And I'd just like to comment, as a former supervisor of the town of Canandaigua and a member of the Ontario County Board of Supervisors, Mr. Brennan was instrumental in helping us achieve so many of our goals when it came to farmland protection and being successful with purchase of development rights and conservation easement programs. So for that, I am forever thankful.
You're welcome.
And for those of you who may have exited from the thruway, the Canandaigua exit, and came down 332, that's a good example of where you helped us out tremendously. The town, along with Finger Lakes Land Trust and the Pritchard family, have permanently preserved almost 700 acres of land on both sides of Route 332. That was a huge accomplishment for the town, and there have been many more that have followed that, so thank you.
Great example.
Thank you. Jeff Harold from the rural outskirts of Albany, New York, and has advanced degrees in land use planning and forest management. He has been with the Department of Ag and Markets for 2 years, working closely with the Farmland Protection Planning Grants Program and the Farmland Implementation Grants Program. So once again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and I'll hand over the mic to David to get the show on the road.
Well, thank you. This is the third in a series of community forums that the American Farmland Trust, our partners at the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, and the New York State Legislative Commission on Rural Resources have been holding together. Today's forum is a little bit different in structure because you might have known we're taping today's forum so that we can put it out online for people that could not attend one of our community forums. So we're going to be doing a little bit of presentation. If you have a question, clarifying question, don't hesitate to ask as we go along, but we're going to save most of our really intensive discussion till the end of our program together today, just to make it easier for the videotape. And then for all of you, I heard a lot of people that are serving on local governments and may be interested in land use training credits. We have certification of attendance forms that we will provide after. You have to endure until the end. But we have those. Please come up, see Samantha or I. We'll make sure you get the documentation that you need to go back to your local government. So our forums that we've held have really been premised on three primary beliefs. Number one, farms matter. Farms matter to all New Yorkers. That's number one. That may not seem like a real deep thought, but it is fundamental. Number two, that farms are under threat. That our farmers face really distinct challenges and that we can't take them for granted. That just because farms have been in our communities for hundreds of years does not mean that they will be there next year or in 5 years or in 10 years. And the third is that local governments play a key role in helping to ensure a strong future for agriculture in New York and play a key role in helping to protect the land that farmers need. So those are the three kind of foundational beliefs that we have for the forums we've been hosting and are really informative for what we're hoping to present to all of you today. Just for any of you that don't know the organization that Samantha and I work for, we work for the American Farmland Trust. You may know us by our four-word bumper sticker, no farms, no food. Yep, thank you. We have a deeper mission than just that, but we're a national organization about to celebrate our 40th birthday. We have a three-part mission of promoting sound farming practices, protecting farmland, and helping to keep farmers on the land. So we like to say we work from the kitchen table to the Congress. We've had a New York State office here in New York for nearly 30 years now, and we're supported by thousands of members like all of you. This slide is a sign that I was able to photograph a few years ago. It's in the 315 area code, so we're hitting a little closer to home here. But I think it reflects a sentiment that historically has been too common in communities and the way that they approached farms and farmland. And I'll read it to you. It says, for sale, 120 acres, zoned agricultural, commercial, and residential, good farmland, great investment, city water, sewer. So that says a lot. What it really says, for the purpose of today's presentation, is that we'll allow you to farm today while we're planning for other things. And too often, farms have been treated as a temporary land use and something that was maybe a part of our past, but was not seen as an important part of our future. And as a result, situations like this have been all too common in New York. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, New York has lost the equivalent of 5,000 farms to real estate development since the early 1980s. At its worst, we were paving over 4 farms a week back in the late 80s, early 1990s. So this is an urgent problem, and local governments are particularly well suited to address these types of challenges. But at the fundamental level, if you're going to be taking action in a community, you have to be able to articulate why farms matter. This is really critical. If you're going to be asked as a local government to expend money, if you're going to be asked to enact new public policies, you need to be able to articulate to your residents, to your citizens, why it matters. And so I'm going to hit a couple of highlights, and we'll get into more discussion about these issues later in the presentation. But I want to share with you maybe 3 or 4 ideas that we think are particularly important about why farms matter and why action at a community level is so important. Number one, and this is really critical for many parts of rural New York, farms are critically connected to the health of our state's economy. According to a study that was conducted a couple years ago by Farm Credit East, New York's farms are connected. They produce now about $6 billion in farm products annually, but if there's an invisible web of business relationships that farms have with businesses that provide them with services and then with food processors. And when you add all of that up, combined, it is now about $40 billion a year in economic activity that are associated with food and agriculture in New York. About 160,000 jobs connected to that. So farms are truly a critical part of our state's economy. They're also important to where our food comes from. That most simple bumper sticker of no farms, no food, duh. That is true. Interestingly, Cornell University had done some research a few years ago looking at how many meals come from the average acre of farmland. And They looked at everything from a vegan diet to an Uber Atkins diet. And they found on average, the average acre of farmland in New York produces about 1,000 meals a year. So as we're thinking about the health of our children, and in a world where we're supposed to grow 70% more food by 2050, this is not just a nice thing. Farms and farmland are a necessary thing, and that food security is fundamental to our national security. For those of you that are interested and care about climate change, we often haven't thought about farms as being a part of the solution to climate change. The American Farmland Trust, we released a report back in June called Greener Fields, which looked at greenhouse gas emissions coming from New York from an average acre of farmland compared to developed land. And what we found here is that the average acre of farmland in New York emits 66 times fewer greenhouse gas emissions than an acre of developed land. Now, I know for some of you, combating climate change may not seem like the top priority at a local level, but there are more communities that are thinking about climate change. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has a Climate Smart Communities program. And I think the message from us here today is farms and keeping land in farming is an important part of that climate change agenda, particularly if you're in a rural community. I'm throwing up bar charts now, so you know we're getting into the real meat of the presentation. This is the last point before I move on, but I think one of the big challenges when it came to local governments and their approach to farms and agriculture was a fundamental belief that if we have more development is going to mean more property tax base. More property tax base is going to mean more property tax revenue, and thus everybody's property taxes should go down. That has been a common sentiment in many communities, and it's not unique just to New York. It's a common philosophy. Starting back in the 1980s, starting in some communities in the Hudson Valley, we started to look at, the American Farmland Trust did a series of what we called cost of community services studies, which looked at income by land use, so primarily property taxes, by land use, so comparing houses with commercial and industry and farm and forest land, and we looked at the amount of property tax revenue, and then we compared that with the amount of services that were required by each of those land uses. And what we found on average is, not surprisingly, that residences did provide more property tax revenue, but they also required significantly more services. So on average, for every dollar that residences paid in property taxes or provide in local revenue, they required $1.19 in services. By comparison, the average acre of farmland, for every dollar that it paid in taxes, required back 36 cents in services. So these studies have been done in communities now around the country. There's been about 15, 18 of them done in New York. So this is just the kind of the average or the median of those results. But I think what it showed is that trying to develop our way out of property tax problems is often a short-sighted solution. And that in many cases, more houses, more people can bring more service demand and actually can lead to increases in property taxes. So, farms matter. That's number one. We wanted to start a conversation about some things that we're thinking about why it's so important that we have farms in our community. Now I want to move on to what local governments can do. And I think that's what many of you, it sounds like, are very deeply involved in. I'm going to touch upon a few principles and then some places where there are some tools, and then I'm going to turn the baton over to John and Jeff. Before I do that, though, I'm going to invite Samantha to come up here and to talk a little bit about a survey that we conducted earlier this fall of local governments and kind of issues that were on their mind, in minds of people like you, about what we're doing to support local farms. Samantha?
Thank you, David. So first, David said it already, we did a survey earlier this fall of folks in your position, planners, members of ag and farmland protection boards, members of town boards, planning boards, zoning boards of appeals, farmers extension agents, and found that when asked the question, do you feel your local government is showing through its actions that it supports agriculture in your community? Almost 90% of respondents said yes. So first of all, thumbs up, well done. Next, when asked, what has your local government done that's been most effective in keeping land and farming and farmers on the land? Number one was creating or expanding agricultural districts. Creating ag and farmland protection plans was number two. The third was expanding markets for farm products in your communities. And the fourth was enacting farm-friendly zoning. So these came up as both what the governments have done and what has been most effective, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then when asked, what are the most significant threats to the future of farming in your community? The most people rated highly, farmers retiring and selling land to non-farming uses. So that was number one. We have an aging farm population in this state and in this country, and all too often we see farmers without other options, selling land to non-farming uses. Second was high property taxes. 68% of folks rated this highly. And then 60% of folks rated the rising price of farmland very highly, as well as the loss of the economic viability of farms, particularly with certain kinds of farming. So then finally, we'll get to what you can do about it, but we asked people, what do you want more information on? What's going to be most useful for you to learn to keep this land and farming in your communities? And the first, number one, was we'd like to learn about building strong markets for local food. And then second was, probably unsurprisingly to many of you, we'd like to learn about the siting of commercial scale solar and how we can build out renewable energy while also keeping our best farmland in farming. And then third, communities wanted to learn more about the fiscal impacts of development versus keeping land and farming. So this is just to give you a snapshot of some of the things that we learned from this survey that we conducted earlier this fall. And this will guide our conversation as we move forward into providing you with some tools and resources.
All right. So one of the fun challenges we face in New York is that we have 930 towns, roughly. 50-some counties, 53 counties, 54 counties that have significant amounts of agriculture. There's incredible diversity in this state. And so the tools, the approaches that may work in one community can be very different in another community. What we've tried to identify are some core principles that we think that every town and every county can aspire to achieve, that no town and no county has done everything, and that no town, no county can do nothing. So these are, I just want to highlight 5 key principles that we think every local government in New York should aspire to achieve. Number 1, demonstrate an understanding of agriculture. By that I mean having something in writing that describes farms in your community, the challenges they're facing, why they matter. So for example, if you have a town comprehensive plan, crack it open. Do you have a section on agriculture specifically in your town comprehensive plan? That is a very logical place to demonstrate that you have a distinct understanding locally of agriculture, the challenges it faces, and why it matters. Secondly, creating a supportive business environment for farms. If you were to talk to farmers about the biggest business challenges they face, there would often be answers of issues that are at a bigger scale than a local government can easily address. You might hear things like immigration and workforce issues. You might hear things like milk prices. Those are really hard to address at a town scale, even at a county scale. But there are things you can do at a local level to make sure that your regulations are not inhibiting local farmers and their ability to adapt to new markets. So for example, you'll hear from farmers about farm workers. At a municipal scale, at a town scale, you can make sure that your zoning code is really intentional with making sure you're permitting different types of farm worker housing and making that really straightforward in terms of siting of farm worker housing on farms. That's not going to solve immigration issues, but it is going to help a farmer that's trying to bring workers and have them live on their property. Third, supporting appropriate property tax policy for farmland and buildings. As Samantha said, property taxes continue to be a big issue for farmers. Making sure that farmers are fully participating and agricultural landowners are fully participating in programs like agricultural assessment or farmers' school tax credit or other programs is critically important. There are other things you can do locally. So things like fire districts and other service districts, you can take steps to adopt agricultural assessment for those taxing jurisdictions. That does not happen automatically. So every local government should look at what is being done and can be done to help support appropriate property tax policies for farmland owners. Fourth, develop specific strategies to protect your best farmland. Not all land is created equal when it comes to farming. Some land is just inherently more productive, more versatile, more resilient for farm use. So as a community, you need to know where that better farmland is and then have some type of strategies, and we'll talk more in a minute about the strategies you can use, but you need to have some type of strategies about how you're going to keep that better land available for agriculture. And then lastly, as new development happens in your community, how do you take steps to make sure that development is sited in a way, designed in a way, and you have policies in place to reduce the impacts of that new development on farms and farmland? Those are 5 key principles that every local community in New York should be aspiring to achieve. So how do you do that? The good news is there's a lot of tools in a proverbial toolbox. For those of you that are getting a little nervous, thinking like, oh my gosh, I think he's going to go through each of one of those. I'm not. I will just suffice it to say that as we get further in our discussion later, we'll dig into some of these individual tools. I just want to highlight that there are a lot of different ways that local governments are taking action, whether it be things like agricultural districts and right to farm laws, to local land use laws like zoning and subdivision ordinances, things like buying development rights and conservation easements, to their economic development programs. Even more recently, we're seeing more, often it's county governments looking at county dollars that are getting spent on buying food and trying to take steps to buy more of that food from farmers in New York. So there is a really broad and growing suite of tools that local governments are using. And the good news is there's some really important resources that are available to you to find those examples. I've got 2 publications that are identified here. We have a couple of copies up here. If you're interested in seeing a copy, you can find them for free on this website, farmlandinfo.org. The publication on the left, our Planning for Agriculture in New York, a toolkit for towns and counties, has case studies of 80 different communities and how they've used those different tools. Most of those communities are from New York. And if you've got enough print cartridges, I think there's 3,000 pages of codes, policy descriptions, program descriptions that you can find on that website that are in that publication on the left. The publication on the right, Growing Local, is a national publication that was just released this past spring by the American Farmland Trust and the American Planning Association, some of our partners in a project called Growing Food Connections. That is looking at these issues from a national stage. So the case studies there are from around the country of what local governments are doing to support farms, support agricultural economic development, and support local food systems. And so that new publication has a much bigger emphasis on public health and nutrition and looking at both urban environments and suburban and rural communities. So Samantha and I are going to be here to be a part of your conversation, but certainly we have some great ways for you to get information about our programs and resources we have here. If you want to stay in contact about things that are happening in New York, so you can find us on Facebook, you can find us on our website, and then we have perhaps our best ambassador, our forward bumper sticker, so we've got some of those in the back as well. So I really appreciate all of your attention. Samantha and I are very much looking forward to having a rich discussion with you about all of the issues we've just introduced. But before we do that, I want to really thank our partners at the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, John and Jeff. Invite them to come up here, and then we'll dive into our discussion. So, John?
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you, David and Samantha, for getting us out of the office in Albany. We do get bogged down with plans and ag districts, and it is often difficult to get us out. So we really appreciate this opportunity. Again, I'm John Brennan and Jeff Kehoe from the Department of Agriculture. We're in the Ag Protection Unit in the department, and we're located in Albany on Airline Drive. So today I want to talk about three main things. I want to talk about the Ag Districts program. I want to talk about lessons learned, and of course introduce Jeff. He is a new staff, and he's going to be assisting in both the county and the town grant programs, and he'll also help David Bain in the PDR program. These are grant programs that are offered through our department and through our ag protection section. Basically, we have a map up here that shows the ag districts across the state. David talked about the importance of planning for the protection of agriculture. And one of the basic steps in the protection of agriculture is certainly the utilization of ag districts maps for your towns and for the county. The ag districts, we have approximately 53 counties out of the 62 counties in the state that have ag districts. As there's a predominance in the center part, and here's our ag district map in Ontario County. There are 210 districts, covers close to 8.8 million acres of land, and it includes 25,600 farms that are in the ag district. Oftentimes, we do an awful lot of work in updating and including farmland in the ag district program, but oftentimes the ag districts are not reflected in local planning. It is a strange disconnect. We have farmers and landowners who have self-identified that they want to be part of an ag district. They petitioned the county legislature to be included in the ag district. The legislature goes forward and passes a resolution to include them into the district, and then that gets sent on to the Commissioner of Agriculture for certification by the commissioner. But the disconnect is that often town plans and zoning plans do not reflect the fact that there are farmers in the area. I've seen many plans in which we have zoning that is very intense on top of agricultural land. Maybe the town officials believe that it's just vacant land waiting to be developed. But that is not the true statement. We have individual farmers who have self-identified to be part of an ag protection program, and that this is a very important tool, the first tool basically in ag planning. Some of the elements of the tools of the ag district include agricultural assessment. This is by far one of the greatest elements of the ag district program. To get an agricultural assessment, you can be in an ag district. You don't have to be in an ag district. But it is available to individuals who have 7 acres or more and make $10,000 or more. And they get an assessment. They make an application every year to their town assessor. And through various proofs of these 2 requirements, they will receive an ag assessment. An ag assessment is different than a fair market assessment. So there is a reduction in taxes for the farmer. It is often called an exemption, but it is not an exemption. Farmers still pay taxes. It is not a complete wash, but there is a reduction in the taxes that are put on the farm. Another element that ag districts can provide is that it does set public policy associated with towns and the state in terms of the protection of agriculture. And what I would like to see is that some of the ag protection policies that are in the ag district legislation gets translated into policies down to the town level. It's really an important element. That is the idea of developing public policy. These are public policy statements within the individual town through either their comprehensive plan or through an agricultural protection plan in which they clearly state that their goal and objective is to protect agriculture. These public policy statements are very powerful elements, and sometimes they need to be crafted at the local level so that they say exactly what the town has in mind in terms of the protection of agriculture. The ag district tool also includes a right to farm law, and although it is very broad and sometimes cumbersome in terms of actually bringing it to the state, we often encourage towns to develop their own right to farm law. This would be locally crafted, and the key element of a local right to farm law is to establish a dispute resolution committee to evaluate and to help guide farmers and neighbors and the town in terms of conflicts and the ability to resolve conflicts before they get into the point of going to court. And that could be a very expensive proposition for either the farmer or the town. Another element of the ag district program is that it's the issue of protection from unreasonable restrictions at the town level. This is generally held and worked on by Bob Summers in our department. Many people may know Bob. He gets maybe 7 to 15 calls a week from either farmers or town officials who are involved with conflicts in the interpretation of local laws or permissions to provide right to farm activities within the farm operation. And Bob does a tremendous job of trying to negotiate between farmers and neighbors, neighbors and towns, farmers and towns, to resolve issues that might come up in terms of farm operations and farm activities. There's another element of our tools, and that includes real estate disclosure statements. When an owner is selling a property, a real estate agent will provide a disclosure statement in which they identify whether or not the property is in an agricultural district or not. And then we have an agricultural data statement, which is provided to planning boards to identify farms that may be near a particular proposed development that they are reviewing. So those are some of the key elements, basic elements. The Ag District program has been in existence since 1971. It's been amended and improved every year. And the counties do a fantastic job, whether it's the county planning office or maybe it's the Soil and Water Conservation or Cornell. They do a fantastic job of updating the ag districts on a regular basis. And they need to be commended for the great work that they do in improving and producing great maps for counties to use. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say about ag districts. We can take questions afterwards. I want to introduce Jeff Kehoe, who will talk about planning grants and planning grant opportunities and funding opportunities that are available through the department. So Jeff? Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon. So I'm going to try to hit some of the finer points of some of the opportunities that are available through Ag and Markets to help local municipalities and counties to protect agriculture. So municipal ag plans, we've talked a lot about it. They're locally derived plans that identify actions that they would like to take to protect agriculture. We like to think of it as an opportunity to translate your frustrations into recommendations for change. That's the way I like to look at it. Your planning committee should get together with other collaborators and identify lands to be protected. Take a look at your local zoning code and subdivision regulations to prepare a farm-friendly analysis, and also make strong recommendations for what are the next steps to protect agriculture. County plans, which you can receive up to, oh, by the way, for municipal plans, a town can receive up to $25,000, and I'll rehearse a cost share scheme in a minute. For county ag plans, they don't have as much control over land use laws as municipalities do, so the thrust of the plan is to identify ag economic development opportunities to help your county further agriculture and to increase the profitability of farms in your county. It's also an opportunity to perform farm-friendly analyses on some of the towns within your county that are most threatened. And then, of course, there's also an opportunity to provide recommendations. So the farm-friendly analysis, which looks at multiple documents at the local level, the result of that should be a handful of laws that could be modified to protect agriculture. And we offer up to $15,000 in a separate grant for local municipalities to amend their local laws to become less restrictive to agriculture. And along with that grant, there's also the opportunity to develop a transfer of development rights law, which is an advanced concept. And the planning document that David has put up before will go into more detail about that. And then, of course, there's our purchase of development rights program, which is, I believe, in its 25th year, and it's highly competitive, and it offers up to $2 million per farm operation to purchase the development rights. That's roughly released every 2 years, and we believe that May of 2018 is likely the next opportunity for that. So here's a map of the existing counties and towns that have plans in process or have adopted plans. And I think 53 counties have adopted plans, and several of them have gone through the 10-year cycle and are about to adopt them again or modify them. And then we have over 90 towns who have also adopted a local ag protection plan or are in process. And here is a breakdown of our cost share for a municipal grant. So if a town would like to receive $25,000 from the department, it would require a $1,600 match in cash, and then about $6,700 in local match, where you could lean on the county for GIS work or bring in Cornell Cooperative Extension as a logical collaborator. And soil and water conservation districts can also help you write chapters and talk about some of the finer points of ag assessment and ag districts. And I think I'm going to wrap this up because all of our cost share programs are roughly the same. About 25% of the total project costs will be required in match. 20% of that will be required in cash. So if you ever have any questions, please get a hold of either John or I, and we can help you through that. Again, we have to recommend this Planning for Agriculture document that was written in part by AFT and New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. It's an excellent tool. It identifies everything we've talked about and more. It gives excellent case studies. And again, that's available at farmlandinfo.org. And if you have any questions about any of those grant programs or ag districts or anything John and I have talked about today, please contact us. Thank you.
All right. Well, before we move too much further in our agenda and really kind of open things up for discussion, I really want to thank Senator Helming for co-hosting this series of forums. I can't tell you how important it is to have people in our state legislature that understand farms, that have been involved in local governments, and understand that we need to have land if we're going to have farms. And we need to have state support for all of those things. So I really want to thank Senator Helming for co-hosting this workshop series with us. It is just incredibly helpful and so important for what communities are doing around New York State. So thank you very much, Senator.